Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It is Thursday, the 27th of September, 2012, and our special guest is Tom Vander Ark, among other things, the author of Getting Smart. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Steve.
Thanks so much for being here. The Future of Education is a Web 2.0 Labs project, thanks to Mighty Bell and Blackboard Collaborate for support. I am on my Hack Your Education tour. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight with Tom. Currently in Washington State, talking to communities around the country about education. The Learning 2.0 conference recordings are up, learning20.com. That was an incredible event. Again, they're all available for free. Go to learning20.com, and I think you'll have some fun. Coming up next week, our second Future of Libraries conference, sponsored by San Jose State University. That's October 3rd through 5th. 150 sessions, 10 keynotes, 24 hours a day for 2 days. It will be really, really fun. Can't wait for that. So if you're interested in the library world, please sign up, library2012.com. We had 10,000 attendee logins last year, and we expect even more this year. And then in November is our annual Global Education Conference. This is the global conference. This is the Conference on Global Education, not the Global Education Conference, if you can understand the distinction. But this is all about connecting teachers and students globally. It is a blast, 5 days, 24 hours a day. It's incredible. Lucy Gray, my coach here, does an amazing job getting keynote speakers, and you will have a lot of fun. Plus, we're still taking applications to present. This is a highly inclusive conference. It's all about participating, so we hope that if there's something you're doing in that area, that you'll come and share it. Coming up on the Future of Education, next week is a little bit of a break because of the Library 2.0 and 2. Then on the 9th of October, Blake Bowles comes on to talk about his book, Better Than College. Denise Pope from Stanford comes back to talk about her Challenge Success program. Kirsten Olson, first time on the show, will talk about her book, Wounded by School. Very interested in that. Susie Boss comes back to talk about her new book, Bringing Innovation. Jamie McMillan on Legendary Learning, Famous Homeschoolers. Can't wait for that. Yo Wishnik, Tony Jackson from Asia Society coming on in November. Then the Global Education Conference. Anyway, and lots more fun that hasn't been posted yet, but we'll keep you informed at futureofeducation.com. If you've missed any of the sessions, there are now over 300 of them. This has been a busy week. Last night was the True History of the MOOC panel. Dave Cormier, Stephen Downs, Alec Koros, Rita Kopp, Inga Duard. I mean, this was really, really fun. Carol Yeager. Really worth listening to, especially kind of Stephen Downs' diagram of where he thinks this is going. And the difference between the connectivist MOOC and the sort of ex-MOOC now popular. Ron Richhart from Harvard talked to us about making thinking visible. The student author, Nikhil Goyal, talked about one size does not fit all. Anyway, lots up there, really worth listening to if you have the time, both in full Blackboard Collaborate form and in MP3. So this is where we get to find out from our studio audience where they're listening from. Look for the star to the left of the map, click on it twice, and then click on the map. Feel free to shout out in the chat. I always know Bill is in the audience when I see that the Philippines link. Australia. Looks like a couple in Australia, 2 or 3. Thanks so much for joining us, wherever you're participating from, or if you're listening to the recording. We're sure glad that you have taken the time. There is a Mighty Bell space for this interview. I do consulting work for Gina Bianchini, and Gina was co-founder of Ning. I consulted for Ning for 18 months, and I'm now consulting on Mighty Bell, so that's full disclosure. But there's this space to aggregate information about tonight's show. Feel free to use it for conversation, for linking to blog posts and the like. So Tom, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I know you're in demand.
Great to be here. You've had an amazing list of interviewed guests, so it's I'm really pleased to be with you, Steve.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way. So I wanted to start with a question that's really not answered in the book, although you tell some delicious stories I can't wait to talk about. But I've been asking parents, students, and teachers to identify their own most significant learning memories, experiences that they had as a child or a young adult that were sort of seminal or critical to them. What were yours?
You know, it's interesting. I'll pick an unusual one out, and it happened in the middle of the night with a drunk boss when I was 27. I had gone all the way through graduate school and don't really think I learned to write until I had a boss that really cared about what went to the board of our public company. And he made me rewrite everything 3 times and then would rewrite it himself. It was really the first time that I'd seen an adult care so much about a work product and really agonize over making a written product as clear and concise for an audience as it could possibly be. And while that learning experience was not very pleasant, it gave me a very high bar for work product and an appreciation for the written word and the writing process. And so it was late in life, but an important lesson.
Do you have any memories, sort of K-12, of teachers who influenced you significantly?
There's a 7th grade writing teacher that I think was really encouraging, and I know I read and wrote a lot for her, and so that was instrumental as well.
Have you, as an adult, kind of discovered ways in which you feel that you learn best?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually learn by writing. I find that I try to write a blog every day, which is a lot. And there's a variety of ways that makes me learn. When people ask me really good questions, I write them down, and I'll often say, I'm not sure what I think about that, but I will write it and I'll send you a link. And that kicks off what is usually several days, sometimes a several-week investigation of asking the smartest people I know about a topic. And so writing is not only the way I come to understand what I think about a subject, it's a way that I push my own learning and ask smart people for their opinion.
Interesting, because for me, while I do learn while writing, I really learn in this format, the talking. There's an old Irish proverb that how will I know what I think until I hear myself say it? And I go through almost the exact same process, but it's typically in a conversation, and I'll say something and quickly write it down because I realize my brain's made a connection that it hadn't made before. We do this exercise. It's been really fun to do this with local communities because we kind of try to move forward from personal learning experiences and learning styles to kind of defining an environment conducive to personal learning planning. There was so much language in your book that I really loved around these kinds of things. You clearly feel that this is a significant time in human history.
It is a pivotal time. It'll prove to be more important than the printing press was 500 years ago, and it will happen much quicker. It's the shift to digital learning is really the first chance that we've had to significantly and relatively quickly boost student achievement here in this country, and the first chance in human history to extend access to quality, particularly quality secondary, to every young person on the planet.
So I do think it'll be fun to kind of drill down there and sort of the distinction between access and learning. I want to tell you that I knew some of your background, but there are 3 stories that you tell early on. It may even be in the forward. The Colorado Children's Campaign, taking a job as superintendent just as a strike started, and then sitting in the audience at your daughter's graduation. Those felt to me like kind of significant moments in your own kind of commitment to what you're doing?
Yeah, no question. The first story, I was a young CFO of a public company at the time, about a $3 billion company, and my boss told me to pick a Denver children's charity and to take them to the next level. And I begrudgingly joined the board of the Colorado Children's Campaign, and a remarkable executive named Barbara O'Brien, in about 60 days, had made me a complete evangelist for kids. And it was a combination of field trips to schools in the barrios of West Denver and a lot of data about the real gaps in opportunity in America today. So I knew at that point I'd spend the rest of my life working on educational equity. I did have the chance after we sold that company to become a public school superintendent, and did have a teacher strike my first day on the job. That was the whole thing was a very steep learning curve, sort of entering into an alternative universe. It was a really wonderful leadership and certainly a great learning opportunity for me. And then unfortunately, I think I learned a lot after I left the job. I went. My daughter graduated shortly after I left the superintendency to help Bill and Melinda start the Gates Foundation, and I went to her graduation, and I was in the audience, and I thought there's not enough kids here, and I actually counted the kids in blue robes, and I only found 400, and I knew that we had sent 600 to that high school, and I spent the next 90 minutes wondering about the 200 young people in my own community that had not made it to school. And I did some mental math, and there were probably almost 10,000 kids on my watch just in my town at our 5 high schools that did not walk, and that was really a moving experience for me, and it's a big part of why we spent the first 8 years at the Gates Foundation really focused on the graduation crisis in America.
Those stories were moving to me. I mean, I could really could see what an impact it would have had on you. I especially thought the teacher strike one was illuminating because I'm sure it was much more complex than the few lines you give it in the book. But you do indicate that it became a real opportunity for you to become part of a dialogue with the teachers. Is that right?
In the community, Steve, during the day I walked a picket line just meeting teachers trying to find out what was going on. And then at night I ran an open mic session and just kind of played Phil Donahue for the community. And every night for 3 hours, we would just talk about kids and community. And it was a bit of a public puke where people would just come and sort of pour their hearts out about their hopes and dreams, both teachers and parents. And it was occasionally really angry, but it every night became a real constructive dialogue about what we could do better together. And by the end of the week, I knew most people in town.
So if we take that kind of to the meta level, it also led me to think a little bit about sort of how we view education in this country. And you had this experience where that community dialogue was really valuable. And one of the places that I've often pushed back with guests, especially Charles Fidel, who's come on with some regularity, is this idea that somebody at the top is going to determine what's the best education or what's the best system.
Right.
And unlike our heavily democratic heritage, there's this assumption that we can just kind of push that down. How do you balance that tension between kind of finding things of value through sort of high-level focus groups and the need for participation?
Well, if any version of that was ever possible, the days are gone. Since the inflection point of the mobile web in 2010, what's changed in the last 24 months is this subversive, disruptive process where parents, teachers, and kids are finding creating, sharing learning resources. It's the bottoms-up, anywhere, anytime learning opportunities that exist have changed how change happens, particularly in education. So there are a few communities where an enterprise approach to change will happen that is not very often top-down. If it is an enterprise approach where everybody is using a similar pedagogy and a similar school model and similar tool set, Mooresville, North Carolina is a good example of that. I call it an enterprise approach. But Mark Edwards there is just, I think, a masterful leader who really does a nice job of inclusive leadership and continual dialogue, and where people really feel heard and valued. So that may be an example of an enterprise approach, where a small community that feels really connected, where the culture really values learners and teachers. But I think much more often, a big city needs a portfolio approach. Jim Shelton and I first wrote about this in 2004. The Gates strategy was built on this portfolio approach, and the Center for Reinventing Public Education continues to advance that sort of portfolio approach. I think the best city leaders can do now is really to try to empower communities to create great options.
There's a nice parallel there between learning as a process and the community development of education as a process. But it feels like that really gets lost in the national dialogue on education. Especially sort of we watched what happened in Chicago and kind of the single note we hear from either party about accountability. Do we have a way to shift the national dialogue toward an understanding of that value of process?
That's a tough question, Steve. I guess I'm pretty discouraged about the national dialogue. I wrote about that on my EdWeek blog today. I'm pretty angry at the sort of thin rhetoric from both parties when it comes to education. I am, however, really optimistic about the options that are being created. I'm really optimistic about what's happening in a lot of communities around the state, around the country. I do think we're in a time where city and state leaders can make an extraordinary amount of difference. So I do think it's the bully pulpit and the opportunity to frame the opportunity set in a city. I was talking to the New York City iZone Innovate New York City team today, and I think that's an example of folks that really, for their teachers and kids, have an opportunity to really help create new tools and new schools in a very exciting way. So I'm encouraged by a lot of what I see. I'm not encouraged about the national dialogue. For example, it's just a complete travesty that Congress hasn't been able to even address ESEA in 10 years. It's outrageous that law that was well intentioned in 2001 hasn't been fixed 5 times since then.
So
it's a mixed.
You're sounding more negative than I think the book is. Let's sort of shift gears then.
Well, I'm optimistic about what's in front of us. I think in large measure we're going to make big progress, sort of in spite of fairly dysfunctional national politics.
As I read the book, I thought you're definitely wearing rose-colored glasses when it comes to technology, and I'm often accused of the same thing. There's a lot of Kool-Aid that I want to drink, but I want to ask some sort of deeper questions as we go through this and kind of give you a chance to justify that optimism. One is, as a father of 4 children, and especially kind of with the age span of my kids and watching technology change, there are 2 things that come out of my experiences as a parent. One is that sometimes the technology is a distraction from the deeper thinking or habits of mind.
Sure.
And the other is that there's actually more work sometimes because of the technology. Now, it's better work and it's better outcome, but it feels like the promise of having things be easier or faster or simpler sometimes doesn't square with my own experience.
So two big questions. I guess to the disruption, absolutely. It's never been more important for parents to manage kids' time online. The new digital divide is less and less about access to devices and more about how time online is being used. So yes, it is going to be even more important for teachers and parents to manage time online and to try to both curb how much there is and what happens while kids are online. In terms of the more work, I just reviewed Michael Fullen's new book, Stratosphere, and he's even rosier than I am. It's a very high level, very optimistic book, but he does say that as leaders in the sector, we need to build what he calls skinny solutions, stuff that's hard to build but really easy to implement, and that we need to make education tools that are, as easy as iPads to use. Turn on, turn off. You don't need to read a manual. You don't need to go to 8 hours of training. So we are in a super frustrating state between sort of first-gen tools and second-gen tools, and you can choose between a learning management system with flat and sequential content that is easy to monitor, or you can choose between a bunch of whiz-bang Web 2 stuff that's fun and engaging, but none of it stitches together. So it is early, it is messy, and right now to do an innovative school, it is more work, but I'm so optimistic about how fast that's changing. I'm very confident that we're going to see really powerful learning platforms in the next 24 months that do make it easier to provide the kind of personalized learning experience that we've wanted to for a long time.
That response is interesting to me, in part because when I was saying that, I was thinking less of overseeing my children's use of the internet or the tools, and more of the time it takes to build a character of self-direction, which feels like it's different than kind of controlling. It feels like the work that I was thinking of was more kind of the highly human, detailed work of helping somebody become self-motivated because the world will offer so much possibility that they need to be driving themselves. Does that make sense?
Sure. I think it's the motivation. There's so much content that's so engaging and so motivating. I think it is a challenge, however, to stay goal focused and directed, really to modulate one's use of time in a thoughtful way. I mean, for us as adults, we're just learning this skill in a Web 2 world, and I think we're often sort of learning and teaching simultaneously.
Yeah, there's a place in the book where you say, as more content is offered automatically on the web, teachers can focus on the important stuff like critical thinking. And I wondered if that wasn't a little bit at odds with this idea that we would need fewer teachers, because for me that teaching of critical thinking, at least as a parent, feels like it's actually more time consuming.
Well, I do envision a different kind of school day and sort of a flipped day where we can send home a customized playlist with every kid and spend more time at school in Socratic seminars, in workshops, in project-based learning, in community-connected more authentic work. And you're right, that may not be it. I think we have to be smart about how we manage that time. But I do think the technology, the personalizing technology, can help us extend the reach of our best teachers. That really is, I think, the most important factor, not fewer teachers, but extending the reach of the best teachers we have. And I think the exciting thing from a teaching standpoint is I think we can create working conditions that are just much better, and working environments that are more interesting, and a support system that's much better for new teachers where they join a team. Blended learning is really a team sport, not the sort of individual practice. I think about the assignments that I gave to new teachers, often the most difficult schools and the most difficult classrooms and the most difficult schools, and it's really crazy thing to do. And I think we can build an on-ramp for new teachers that lets them learn the craft and the tools, and build a lattice of opportunity for learning professionals that creates really, really interesting options. And for teachers that want to stay in the classroom, the opportunity to earn a lot more than they do today.
I did love the description of the increased options for teachers. I thought that was really brilliant. But
Steve, I would just add that one of the most exciting things that's happening in the sector is just the level of talent that's coming into the sector is really unprecedented. As a venture investor, I get to see lots of proposals and lots of new teams every week, and all the smart kids from all the best schools in the country want to work in education, and that's I think really, really heartening. So it's an exciting time to be an educator, and what's happening is that teachers now have many different ways to make a difference, and many different ways to work with children. Some that are traditional, and some that are very non-traditional.
Does it help to define a difference between a great teacher as one who's good at delivering content and a great teacher who's able to draw out the individual motivation and engagement of a student?
Sure.
And if so, does that sort of further define where a great teacher is teaching online and where a great teacher is in the classroom?
Sure. I think we're going to have to get better at understanding people's gifts and interests as educators, and helping them find or create roles that really best suit their interest and skills.
Yeah, I mean,
and for some that'll be creating content, and for some it will be coaching students.
Yeah, again, I'm going to pay you some compliments in a minute. So, this is sort of the place where I felt a little pushback for me, was that the idea that great teachers would then be sort of magnified to the online environment. And I wondered, well, oftentimes that great teacher wasn't necessarily because of the content they were delivering or the engaging style. You'll often hear teachers tell stories of, like Ron Richard from Harvard this week said, I thought I was a great teacher because I told jokes and I engaged the students. They were like being in class. But I didn't realize until I was really impacting individual students and helping them think about thinking that that's what was really critical.
Right. Well, you're putting, I think, these extended impact ideas in too small a box. Look at the work that Public Impact is doing, opportunityculture.org, for 10 examples of ways that great teachers can extend their reach. And I think technology can help in a variety of ways to create school cultures and school environments that where all teachers can do the kind of work they want, and where the best teachers have an opportunity to influence the achievement and persistence of a larger number of kids.
Absolutely. And I guess my question was, there's this sort of dotted line of blended learning and teachers online, meaning a cost savings, and I'll just sort of leave that as an open question because I wasn't convinced that that would actually be the case. It felt like you would need more personal attention, again, with my own experience with my kids. We can move on.
Well, where there is the potential to use a really comprehensive learner profile to drive a customized playlist for every kid, and like Rocket Ship Elementary in San Jose, for kids to spend, even elementary kids to spend 20 or 25% of their time in async learning, buys some time for teachers to spend more time in small groups, one-on-one, or in larger group sessions. So the technology can buy us some time to do the kinds of things we've always wanted to do. I mean, one of my favorite examples is at School of One. Every kid gets a playlist every day in math, and quite often that includes a small group instruction. So a teacher will have a group of 6 or 8 students, and the magic of that setting is that every student is ready for that lesson in that mode on that day. And that's the magic we ought to be able to deliver to teachers, that a smart algorithm and a dynamic scheduling system that creates an environment where she can be successful.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that in things like Amazon, right? I mean, I feel like my book buying experience is 10 to 20 times magnified. I was recently in Powell's bookstore in Portland and realized that I don't like being in a physical bookstore because I can't see the reviews of other people. I literally looked at the shelf of books and said, I have no way of gauging the value of these different books. So clearly, there are plenty of ways in which I think we're going to see, again, the rose-colored glasses, I'm wearing them as well. Hey, I loved your appendix suggestions, especially the idea of building an online learning plan and kind of the parents modeling the learning as well, and the motivational profile. So I don't know that there's a good sense for me in the book of kind of the primacy of the role of parents, but how do you address the poverty parent issue?
So one thing that needs to happen in the next 36 months is that we just begin to take that, begin to close at least the digital divide by making sure that every kid and soon every family is connected, and that every kid has a mobile learning device. I think when every student has access to quality content and quality teachers 24/7, that makes a difference. And with the advent of online assessment in 2014-15, districts and states really have to start figuring this out now. And by 2014-15, we need to be at least, I think, a 1 to 2 kind of environment, and very shortly thereafter, we need to be at a 2 to 1, where every kid is on multiple screens during the day, and getting to a 2 or 3 to 1, not a 3 or 2 to 1, meaning a 2 or 3 screen day, is going to require some budget reallocations from districts. It'll require a contribution from states, maybe the feds, and it'll require that we make good use of bring your own device strategies, and encouraging kids to, as they say in Riverside, bring what you have. We'll make sure you get what you need, and we'll work with you on connectivity.
I talked before the show about the sort of somewhat incredible value we now get, not only in the cost of the device, but what it gives us access to in ways that, as somebody who's a little bit older, I feel just sort of stunned by my ability every day to find material and then I have to drive down to the bookstore or the library to follow up on the topic. But there are many who kind of push back on that, feeling like the idea of seeing the technology as a panacea isn't fair to the process. That those of us who are older have a mental process for understanding that. So along with the access to technology, obviously there needs to be a fair amount of training. And are teachers prepared in their own lives to do that?
No, but it's not an excuse to wait. You know, the exciting thing, as I said before, about what's happening now that we've never experienced is the parents, teachers, and kids are blending their own learning, they're flipping their own lives, and so, you know, as leaders, we need to find ways to empower that while we're supporting the professional learning of teachers. And I said to a friend earlier today, we need to both empower the leaders, create learning experiences for teachers, and we need to be in the business of creating new schools. It is really new school environments that have these new staffing strategies, new schedules that are really competency-based, that expect kids to show what they know. In that sort of new setting, I think adult learning experiences are going to be more meaningful. That's why I recently have written a lot about flex environments, and why I think at the secondary level, why every district should be creating what InnoSight Institute calls a flex school, where it has a digital backbone, where it's a individual progress model. I think every teacher in the country should have an opportunity to spend some time in that sort of environment, just to get a sense for how a one-to-one competency-based model, how that works, and what the teaching role feels like. And so great just-in-time tools for teachers, opportunities to visit schools that work in different ways, and then, you know, empowered learners for kids and parents and teachers that are ready to move.
A question came up in the chat about the Common Core. One of our recent guests, I won't name names, described a large technology company he worked for and said that it was now peopled by individuals who knew how to maneuver the system of the company rather than actually knowing things of real value. Is there a danger that the Common Core becomes kind of a rat's maze, that we assume creativity will build around it, but that it's likely to result in kind of gaming and following?
Well, as you'd see from my Common Core blog on EdWeek today, I'm bullish on the Common Core. It doesn't solve all of our problems, but they're better standards, they're higher standards. The students will read more, they'll write more, they'll do more problem solving, and as I said in my blog today, it's sort of like the iPhone for education. It's a platform for innovation that is already producing an avalanche of great new content, a lot of it open and free, new devices, new platforms. So it is, as somebody said in chat earlier, a huge challenge, right? These are different and higher expectations. I fully appreciate that. But you know, I'm helping companies like Mastery Connect and Learn Zillion create quizzes and tutorial content around the Common Core, and the ability to share that state to state, district to district, school to school is just such a gift. This I think is how things ought to be, rather than every state, you know, creating their own standards. So I'm bullish. I completely understand that 2014-15, when the online assessments start, when the rubber hits the road, it's right around the corner. It's most places aren't going to be ready, and we're going to be disappointed with the initial results, but I think it's a really big step forward.
Nikhil Goyal was on the show. He was 17, I think, when he wrote the book, but he may or may not be 18 now. They wrote this book called One Size Does Not Fit All. And in talking to him, it occurred to me that as much as we talk about wanting independent thinking and innovation from our students, are we ready for students who say, I don't like this system, right? Or now that I'm empowered, I'm going to choose to do something different.
Right.
How do you reconcile that in your own mind?
So as you've heard before, I'm a big fan of options, and I think there ought to be a lot of options for students and families. I do, from an equity standpoint, I strongly support the idea of every student being college eligible. That means they should have the writing and math skills to pass a community college placement exam, and they ought to have a transcript that allows them to begin earning credit in college. And so I do think there's an equity rationale for that kind of goal, and we do need to make sure that as a few people are concerned that the ability to personalize means lower expectations for some kids, and I think we need to guard against that. But I do think it's important to have a few common expectations around reading and writing and probably problem solving. But I'm very interested in a lot of a portfolio of options around those core objectives.
I'm wondering if you know Mark Tucker.
Sure.
So I interviewed Mark, and the impression I got was, there were two pieces that really stuck out for me. One was that in Canada, the teacher pool was relatively equivalent to our teacher pool, but they determined to give more trust and autonomy to the individual teachers. Does that, am I remembering that correctly? And is there a reasonable association with their now better success in Canada?
I can't say, but it is quite different province to province.
So the other piece of that book that was so interesting to me was his statement, and I'm paraphrasing, but that we're behind, and none of the things that we're doing really match with the achievement, with the things that the other countries who are high achieving right now, if you measure by the PISA test, have done. So that would include things like chartered schools and private investment in private companies for education. How do you feel about that particular argument?
That we're not doing the things that high achieving countries are?
Right. Well, and that our solutions for getting to high achievement, like many described in the book, are not actually ones being done by the countries that we're looking at now as
true, but every country is different. It's hard. Finland is great. I love. I spent a lot of time in Sweden and Denmark with Mark Tucker visiting schools there. I think we should learn everything we can from schools in every country that are doing a great job, and then think really hard about the American context. So it's a very different place. I've traveled a lot in Asia and Southeast Asia, and one I find from bottom to the top of the economic pyramid, I find a relatively uniform academic press. I've spent a lot of time in the slums of India, and I find even in those settings, most kids have a number of adults at home who consider academic success of the children their primary goal. I don't find that sort of common academic press in the United States. So this is just a very different challenge. And so I think we just need, given our particular context, to try to create the best possible solutions that we can, community to community and state to state.
So we're going to switch to Q&A. I have some questions if we get a lull. From the looks of this chat, I don't think we're going to get a
stream of great and very difficult questions. No problem there.
So it's hard for me to follow the chat as I'm doing the interview. So if you put a question in the chat for Tom that didn't get asked by me, and that's likely all of them, feel free to post it again or raise your hand and I'll give you the microphone. That's the third icon over. It's the hand icon. And you can raise your hand and take it. Tom, there's so much in the book that we're not going to have time to talk about. I was at Stanford for this LEAD symposium meeting a couple of weeks ago and had an epiphany moment. And it was a nonprofit that's going to aggregate broadband purchasing for schools. And the sort of big aha moment for me was that in a sort of a mature industry, which is broadband, clearly the schools were being way overcharged for their broadband because it was kind of private, the offering of commercial services through private for-profit companies. How do we reconcile those kind of experiences with the idea of investing, these sort of new Silicon Valley venture capital, this is your world, companies, who are likely to be trying to maximize profit and maybe less likely to actually produce the kind of outcome that this nonprofit.
You may be talking about Evan and the Education Superhighway. So I think Evan is, I love that guy and really appreciate his work. Doug Levin at CETA, the State Ed Tech Directors Association, those two are really the ones paying most attention to the broadband challenge. We're going to have a lot of spinning wheels in school this fall and next fall as more and more iPads show up because we're not paying enough attention to this. So school districts and particularly states are going to need to create partnerships to improve broadband access to every home, and particularly to low-income urban households and to rural households. Those are the big challenges. School districts are going to need help from their SEA, the state ed departments, and this should come up any time a state or the FCC is selling spectrum. The question of access really as a public good has to be central as we make this shift to digital learning.
Lawrence has a question. He put it in the chat, but Lawrence, I'm going to give you the mic if you'd like to ask it in person. So to turn your microphone on, you click on the talk button at the top left. And if you don't turn your mic on in a second, I'll just read it from the chat. Looks like his question is, what would be your radical solution to the U.S. K-12 education problem?
The radical solution, Lawrence, is every kid has caring, supportive parents that make education their #1 priority. I haven't figured out how to do that, but wow. So that's a great question. We just wrote a paper on access about 3 strategies states can use to, it's on digitallearningnow.com, about how states and districts can create access for every student. So, I would love to see governors and state chiefs I'd like to see some of them lead. And unfortunately, we haven't seen the leadership that we need at the state level to say, we're going to implement Common Core. I'm behind teachers in my state 110%, and here's a 5-year plan to make the shift to digital, to make sure every kid and every family has access, and to make sure that every teacher has the sort of learning opportunities that they need and want over the next 5 years. So I guess my answer, Lawrence, would be state and district leaders that show some courage and some vision.
Tom, it would be fun to have you to find a time when you and I could do one of these the Hack Your Education community conversations together, because they really are directly tied to this idea of how to help bring parents into the conversation without the tension of the kind of current national dialogue. If you have a question for Tom, you can raise your hand. It's the third icon over in the participant window, or you can put it in the chat. While we're waiting, Tom, I think my question on the broadband was more, this is too broad a brush, but I'll say it anyway, and you can refine it. And if we look at prisons and privatization, and we look at warfare and privatization, we can see some pretty interesting results that come from the incentive structures of making money off of something that we would claim as a public good. How do you protect education from that kind of outcome?
Yeah. So I've written a couple white papers on this subject, and I really believe the big advances, particularly in this country, will come from public-private partnerships. I think it's really important that we create structures where each sector uses, where we put the right form of capital to use, and very quickly, governments need to frame problems and set goals. So that's state and local leaders. They need to invite people to spend money on their problem. So they need to invite philanthropy and private enterprise to the table. Foundations have two unique capabilities that they need to use. That is the ability to take the long view, much more so than elected officials or private capital, and to promote equity. And then third, private enterprise is very good at producing and scaling innovation, and we should create sort of focus and incentives for them to do that. And we need to find ways for those three sectors to work together on all the big problems in society, on health, on transportation, on climate change, but particularly on education.
Okay, again, this is a Q&A time. Feel free to put a question in the chat. I don't think I've missed any, but you're welcome to do so, or raise your hand and I'll call on you. Tom, in the book there are several quotes that talk about the tie between a robust economy and schooling or training. And how do we balance kind of education as a benefit to the individual versus the outcome that's valuable to the economy? Is there a tension there, or are the two reconcilable?
Wow, that's a really interesting question, and I guess I see them as entirely compatible. So
it's kind of a Venn diagram, right? I mean, you have things that are valuable for work, and then you have things that are valuable for your personal independence and thinking. But they don't completely overlap. No. I mean, there are parts that do, but it seems like there's a place where
I would say that more of both is great. And our goal in education is not just employability, but productive citizens, right? And so, from an education standpoint, the more the merrier. This is not just about an educated workforce. It's even more than that, about raising citizens, engaged, enlightened citizens. I think the more, the challenge that I spend a lot of time thinking about these days is now that we are creating all these anywhere, anytime learning opportunities, just-in-time, passion-driven opportunities to learn anything, and we have Common Core and we have job requirements definitions. How do we in interesting ways combine the sort of learner-driven, passion-driven learning with sort of cohort-based programs of study? I think that's the new design challenge of the day.
That certainly came up in our session on the MOOCs. That this, you have a phrase for it, and I got to go through my notes, but it was social learning.
Yeah, that's the exciting thing is that I think the answer is sort of this social learning platforms where teachers can quickly and dynamically create groups, or where learners can create and join groups. And I think we can. Part of the answer is going to be allowing learners to determine how and when to join an interest group, a study group, a project team. So I think giving parents, teachers, and kids the ability to vary that from a limited amount to a lot is going to be really helpful.
I was actually, you and I have never talked before, but I was actually surprised that you didn't mention things like Classroom 2.0, where, you know, for the last 5 years we've had this sort of fascinating opportunity for teachers through a variety of social networks to gather together and do peer professional development. Was it just not on your radar, or is this something that's kind of not as impressive as I think it is?
Just don't know much about it.
Yeah, I think it would be fun for you to learn about it. It really started with the name networks, I think, and it was this ability to, there are now tens of thousands of communities of practice for educators where they get together. And it was the basis of the Department of Education's month in August, the Connected Educator Month. And I think it's kind of brilliant, this idea that teachers are informing each other's practice,
you know, I
and
was
typically was much harder before.
At Moto 3 years ago, so I guess I've spent a lot more time on that front. And we have 1 million teachers on Edmodo this fall, and a lot of them using it to connect with other teachers.
Yeah, and I actually like to think that Jeff O'Hare, who was an early on user of Classroom 2.0, at least was inspired to some degree by Classroom 2.0. Yeah, but it is a fun environment, and you know, there are interesting levels, of course, like all things where they exist, where people get a chance to pick and choose what they want to do. Okay, so I want to allow time for a final question if anybody has one. Or you can raise your hand. It's the third icon over in the participant window, or you can put a note in the chat. Lawrence is back, but Lawrence, you don't have a mic, so I'm assuming you're typing. We may not be able to wait forever, so you may want to keep it a quick
Blended
question. Okay. All right. Where do you see companies like Udemy and crowdsourcing lessons fitting in?
Yeah, great question. Mostly post-secondary. In the I need to learn something fast, or I'm interested in learning something fast. And you know, some people are going to pick a MOOC and wade through kind of solo, and others are going to find a thicker. You know, Udemy just launched hybrid courses that do a nice job of creating a community around a set of learning objectives. And so I guess, in short, there's a lot of great ways to learn things, and it's exciting to watch people choosing the right path for them.
I think that's a great place to finish. Tom, as a courtesy to our guests, we do end on time, so I'm clapping for you. It's now hard in Blackboard Collaborate to find the applause button, but it is under the smiley face icon, and look for applause. That's McClellan. Thanks so much for coming on and for a really good conversation. It's most appreciated.
I'm wrapping up in 2 minutes.
And I'm getting kicked out of the library here in Bellingham, so I'm going to have to go quickly. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Don't miss... I get to the right slide here. Don't miss the Library 20 Conference 2012 conference next week, and then after that, Blake Bowles and Denise Pope and Kirsten Olson. Okay, take care, everybody. Have a good night or day, depending on where you are. Bye now. Bye, Tom.